Okay, break a leg.
Not Emily.
No.
Oh,
Yeah, we should probably not say that.
We have people joining us. We just opened up our webinar, so if you'll wait a second, we'll get started. I found Vicky. She was in the attendees, but I moved her over.
oh, she was?
You can't hide, right?
There she
Yeah.
is.
There's no hiding from us, Vicky.
Oh, can't hear you.
Or mute. You'll need to work on your audio.
Okay,
Great.
Oh, she remuted.
okay. It's a new computer and everything is so touchy. Oh my gosh. It's driving me crazy. Even the keyboard is.
I'm glad I found you. We were just wondering where you were.
Yeah, I was panicking because it hit 7 o'clock and I went, okay, what did I do wrong? And I was in on the wrong email. I was in on my personal account rather than my league account. So I think that was the problem. But
But you ended up in the public. We're here. So we are going to go ahead and get started. We want to thank everybody for coming tonight to the Legislative Action Committee's wrap up of the 2021 session. And I am my name is Peggy Carrico, and I'm filling in for Emily Walsh, who had a small home accident and didn't feel like she could do this tonight. So I'm going to step up and help this group, which is really the ones who are going to speak to it, get through their evening. And if you would use your chat feature, if you want to submit any questions, audience, you can send chats to each other as well as sending them to the panelists, and we'll try to monitor those if you have a comment. And if you'd like to speak, if you'd include that, I can open up your mic so you can speak as well if you have something you'd like to add to the conversation. So we're going to start tonight. Each of the panelists has an area that they've been watching in this session, and they have also been able to have an idea of what we want to have covered tonight. So I'm going to start with Kathy Fitzgerald and have you introduce yourself and go through what you've prepared.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So glad that you are here to join us tonight. The committees that I have been watching through the session have been law enforcement and criminal justice committees. There was a lot of activity in those committees, especially since this was the first general session since the demonstrations last summer. And there were several bills that came as a result of the demonstrations. And of course, on January 6th too had just happened when the session started. And Emily, who had her accident, is kind of with us because she gave us some questions that she would like us to talk about as far as the bills we watched are concerned. And her first question was, of the bills that you witnessed being dealt with, what was the most impactful? And I'm afraid that in my case, what I have to say is the most impactful is bad news, and that's the concealed carry firearms amendments. That was passed quickly at the beginning of the session. And what it does is allow a person 21 or over who may lawfully possess a firearm to carry a concealed weapon in a public area without obtaining a permit. Arguments in favor of that said that there's really no reason for a permit. It's a constitutional right to carry a firearm. Those who are against it said that there are all sorts of health issues involved with the proliferation of guns, and this would lead to the proliferation of guns. The League opposed it because the League opposes the proliferation of guns, but it passed. So that was, I'm afraid, the most impactful bill that went through our committees. Now, there were several, as a result of the demonstrations over the summer, there were several bills which addressed transparency and reporting and investigating incidents of police violence and address law enforcement training. Many of those were passed, and the league supported many of them. As far as lethal force reporting and investigating, there were bills that set up the rules for a local law enforcement agency to report use of lethal force, how you have to, what you have to report, when you have to report it, to whom you have to report it. And it definitely set up some, or it seems anyway, depending on how they work out, that they have set up some, they have codified some ways to give more transparency to the use of force among law enforcement agencies. The other thing, the part of law enforcement that passed most readily was additions to the kinds of training that people want to see law enforcement officers have. For instance, there were bills that passed that we supported that had to do with special circumstances, how instead of how you just react by reacting, how you react to de-escalate a dangerous situation. A bill to train people in special circumstances like domestic violence, how that's different and should be handled differently from other cases of police action. And a bill about addressing special needs cases. For instance, learning what the features are of people who are on the autism scale, and then learning how that's different from normal criminal behavior and how it can be handled differently from normal criminal behavior. Those passed. And I think those were pretty much a good thing. The thing that didn't pass was the oversight, the local oversight, independent oversight committees of police departments. There were a couple that attempted to set up an independent local commission or allow localities to set up independent commissions. Those didn't get anywhere for several reasons, in part because there were indeed, it seems, issues about who had jurisdiction over what, who had authority over what. Did this independent commission have authority over the police chief? Did it have authority over city councils? So there were some questions about those, although I think I think they'll be back. They were not perfect bills, but I think they'll be back in the future. The bills, there were two bills that I'm really concerned about and that I think we should be following. One was the riot amendments, and that's a direct reaction to the demonstrations. It defines riot as any violent actions by 3 people or more. It restricts the ways that people who are arrested, the things that can be done to them. A person who's arrested during a riot has to be taken to a magistrate. That is intended to get them off the streets. Then they have to go through certain procedures in front of the magistrate. That's supposed to take more time. That's supposed to keep them off the streets. And basically the intent of those restrictions were so that the people who are arrested for rioting don't get to just leave the court and go back and rejoin the riot or demonstration, depending on how you define what's going on. The things that really bothered me about that bill were the fact that in all those cases, okay, so the riot is the use of violence against person or property. But it's not only the action itself, it's the intention in the way it is written into the law. So someone who appears to have the intention of doing something violent can be picked up and taken off to jail. And I think that there's a real issue there of freedom of speech and freedom to assemble. And I think that's something that the league should follow, and let's see what happens with that. There is another bill that is a mystery to me. It's not a bill, it's a, what do you call them? Joint resolution from the Senate. And the joint resolution was a request to raise the number of beds in a county jail allotted to state prisoners from now, it seems to be across counties, county jails reserve 10 beds for state prisoners. And the reason they do that is to house overflow from the state prison, mostly. It also makes some money for the local jails. This joint resolution said they wanted to raise that number from 10 beds per county jail to 60, which seemed like a remarkable change. And there was no discussion. It just passed through. So something that I'd like to follow is what were the reasons behind that resolution, and what are the effects going to be? How are county jails going to handle 60 additional state prisoners, or 50 actually additional? So those are the two, the Riot Act and the Jail Beds Act are the two issues that I think we really need to keep an eye on. And there were other things, but.
Thanks, Kathy. Hopefully those beds are not for those rioters that are getting picked up for looking violent. But we're going to move on to Donnie next. Thanks.
I'm Donnie Davis, and I followed the House Health and Human Services Committee. And I think I'll just start out with the joint resolution that Sandra Hollins presented. And it was declaring racism a moral and public health crisis. And of course, the League of Women Voters supported this resolution. And she said this isn't an easy thing to talk about when we're talking about racism, but she wanted to address it for the state and for the nation because she was interested in how COVID-19 was affecting certain communities in her district. COVID-19 affects people with underlying health issues, and it affects health disparities. She said that we need to create common ground with transportation, education, healthcare, water, and food, and that's become really apparent with her through COVID. Racism plays an enormous factor. For an example, in education, students of color are being disciplined at higher rates than other students. She had, Dr. Woodruff from Intermountain Healthcare spoke, and he talked about that recently Intermountain Healthcare stated that racism is a real threat to our patients and our community. There are real actions we can take within our hospitals towards identifying systemic racism. And so she did a wonderful presentation, and let's see, this joint resolution, Emily reminded us that remember, resolutions do not change code, they are only statements. but resolutions can be a means of moving an issue forward in the future, and that's important. This resolution did not pass, and so my hope is that she'll bring it back again next year and change whatever it is she needs to change on that. But I would have loved to have seen this resolution pass this time. A second important one that we opposed was the medical practice amendment, and this was Representative Shipp's amendment. And this was a bill that prohibits physicians from performing transgender procedures on minors. There was lots of discussion, as you can imagine, in this meeting. Lots for and lots against. We opposed it, and Dr. Jennifer Plum, she is a pediatrician at Primary Children's Hospital. She said that she cares about kids in our community, and she's on the American Board of Pediatrics. I work with patients in the ER. We have medical standards of care, and I would never call on all of you and ask how I should treat my patients. I would talk to my colleagues. I trust my colleagues, not my legislature, to tell me how to treat. Trust us as medical care providers for the treatment and care of children, and don't let this overreach step into place. This legislation would prohibit evidence-based medical best practice for transgender youth that have been well established and affirmed by every major medical and mental organization, including the American Academy on Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the American Psychiatric Association. And transgender children, like all children, have the best chance to thrive when they are supported and can get health care, they get the health care they need. This bill would take away from transgender youth in Utah. And that was also opposed by Equality Utah. And this bill failed, but I'm sure they will try something like this again, and we should keep our eyes open for that, as I'm sure we will. Another bill that was important that we supported that did not pass was Derek Kitchen's bill, family planning amendments, and again, we supported it. This directs the state to apply for federal Medicaid waiver to cover the estimated 80,000 underinsured and uninsured Utahns who need access to contraceptives for family planning. He said, as we know, for every $1 that we spend on family planning, we save $7. And this includes a full range of contraception, and there is a gap in Utah, and this is an expansion for family planning. Contraceptions help to time pregnancies, and for that we need comprehensive coverage. There were lots of pros and cons conversations. Again, this is a Medicaid expansion bill, and this did not pass, and hopefully he will bring this again. Let's see, there was just one more, since I'm saying did not pass, one that did pass. And this was the Homeless Youth Protection Amendments. And this was Thurston's. We supported this bill. And this just changed 2 lines in a bill that we already have. We have at any one time around 2,000 homeless youth in Utah. And this bill would let minors be able to check themselves in for help and into shelters, minors being 15 to 17-year-olds. And they could also be harbored by adults without subjecting them to penalties. This bill says that they must report to DCFS and the police and let them know that youths are staying with them. and these youths are often runaways, homeless, or abandoned youth. This is temporary shelter, and this did pass.
Okay, thanks, Donnie. Sally, we're going to move on to you.
Okay, I'm Sally Aulick and I followed education. Excuse me. I'm going to talk about 3 bills that the league supported. And one of them, which I think could have long-range impact, was SB 142, Public Education Funding Amendments from Senator Fillmore. And this enacts a WPU, or Weighted Pupil Unit, add-on funding for students who are at risk based on economic disadvantage or lack of English language proficiency. And this requires the Board of Education to monitor learning outcomes related to this WPU add-on, and also requires a Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee to complete an evaluation and make recommendations for future legislation regarding public education funding. So it's focused on strategic planning and looking at what lay ahead in future needs. The sponsor said this bill is the first step of a multi-year process to address the findings of a WestEd study which assessed Utah's educational funding structure. WestEd is an educational consulting company. There was a lot of positive feedback on this bill from other committee members, and all of the public comment was in support of the bill. So it will be interesting to see what other legislation comes out in the next few years regarding this. There were a few bills that extended educational opportunities to those who might otherwise not have them, and one of them was HB 279, which higher education for incarcerated youth, from Representative Snow. And this bill allows incarcerated youth to pursue concurrent enrollment certificates and higher education degrees. The program is in partnership with Dixie State University, or whatever it's called in the future. And there were some statistics that were given showing that education for these incarcerated young people substantially reduces the risk to reoffend, and of course, increasing the prospect of employment. So that was a good one. One I want to talk about, which did not pass, but we did support it, and it addresses an important issue, is HB 177, Health Education Amendments. You may have read about it. There was in fact, a letter to the editor in the paper today. This was Representative Spackman-Moss's bill, and it began with 2 BYU students who had been sexually assaulted on campus came to the representative, and there were, among many who worked with her on this bill, they felt that they were ill-prepared to fend off unwanted advances. And the sponsor said that Utah's ranked as the 11th most dangerous state for rape and sexual assault. And she gave some statistics that were quite alarming. So this bill would have required the Board of Education to establish curriculum requirements that include instruction in sexual violence behavior prevention and sexual assault resource strategies. Some of the changes between the original bill and the 4th substitute were that all language mentioning the word consent was removed. The amount of instruction was reduced from 1 hour per year beginning in 7th grade to 1 hour in 7th grade, 1 hour in 11th grade, so a total of 2 hours. And most of the testimony was in support of the bill. Many people think what's being taught now is not sufficient. Students need more help in knowing how to talk about this difficult subject. The opposition said things like schools are not the right place for these discussions to take place. It's putting ideas in kids' heads. The representative's response to that was that the parents teach values, but schools give information. And a lot of kids would not get this information anywhere else. A few others think that what needs to be done can be addressed within the current health education guidelines. It was stressed multiple times that this was an opt-in program, so the parents could choose to not have their children participate. Despite the changes and attempts to address all the concerns, the bill failed 31 to 39 in the House. There did seem to be widespread agreement that something needs to be done, so I think this is not an issue that's going to go away. There were, I counted 58 bills heard by the 2 education standing committees. And so I think they did a lot of good work in general this time. I believe the final number for funding was 480 million. So I think it was in general a good session for education, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sally. Norma, you're up next.
Okay, thanks, Peggy. Yeah, I have been following the House Public Utilities, Energy and Technology Committee. And I think the bill that I think it has the largest potential impact that was heard in that committee this session was HB 388, which was titled State Energy Policy Amendments. The state's position on energy has basically been to use all of the above approach, which means, you know, what they want to do is have reasonable utility rates, but they also want reliability. And so they want to be able to take advantage of any useful energy source that we have. I should say the League opposed this bill. And the bill was designed, according to Representative Carl Albrecht, who ran the bill, to develop pumped hydro storage and advanced energy systems, including hydrogen. I think he brought this bill in response to the power disruptions that we saw in California last summer and recently in Texas. And his goal is to maintain adequate power reserves so that we don't find ourselves in a situation like one of those states if we have some sort of emergency. So the goals of the bill are to promote non-renewable energy resources, natural gas, coal, oil shale, and oil sands, nuclear energy, infrastructure to facilitate energy development, and specifically diversified transportation modes, such as the Uinta Basin Railroad, for greater access to domestic and international markets for Utah's resources, which are fossil fuels in this case. They also want to increase refinery capacity. There's some emphasis given to renewable resources, geothermal, solar, wind, biomass, and hydroelectric. They want to promote energy conservation and energy efficiency. And in fact, there was a companion bill, HB 131, run by Steve Handy, where 3,500 state buildings are going to be audited for their energy usage, and so that they can make suggestions for improving energy efficiency. So that's actually a very positive thing, and that did pass. Again, they want to. This would promote energy storage. It seems like the preferred method is pumped hydro. And just for people who aren't familiar with that, it's the idea that when you have, we hope, renewable energy sources like solar power during the day, when you have excess energy, you can use that energy to pump water uphill. And once that water is in a storage pond or whatever it is, reservoir, if power is needed when solar or wind is not available, you can allow that water to run downhill through turbines to generate energy. It's one of the oldest and most reliable ways of storing energy. So that to me is a positive thing. They also want to increase transmission capacity because there are some issues with I mean, when you can make all the power you want, but if you can't get it where it needs to go, it's pretty useless. So that's another issue that needs to be addressed. This bill wants to use a market-driven approach, although they're saying they may have targeted uses of incentives or tax credits. So overall, while this bill is adding energy storage and hydrogen to the mix, the emphasis seems to be on doubling down on fossil fuel development and expanding infrastructure for distribution. And this policy change could have a huge negative impact on our air quality and on climate change. So this bill did pass, and I'm sure it will be signed into law, but I think it's something we should keep our eyes on because it doesn't bode well for clean energy transition. Okay, a related bill, HB 223, is alternative fuel incentives amendments. And this was on our league's watch list. This bill was sponsored by Melissa Ballard, and it enacts corporate and individual tax credits for systems that produce hydrogen from renewable and non-renewable sources. Taxpayers can claim a credit for residential energy systems up to 25% of the cost, up to a $2,000 maximum. I just thought I'd mention for those of you who have solar panels or are thinking of getting solar panels, the limits for those credits are going down over the next few years. They're $1,200 for 2021, $800 for 2022, and $400 for 2023. And after that, they evaporate. So just be aware that those are diminishing and then going away. To promote hydrogen production, the tax credit for producing hydrogen from renewable sources, that would be the electrolysis of water, or non-renewable sources, that would be from fossil fuels, from coal or natural gas, is 12 cents per kilogram, up to a limit of 5.6 million kilograms. And that translates into $672,000 per entity. So there was discussion about the size of this, since this is available to multiple companies. However, Melissa Ballard showed a dynamic fiscal note showing that the benefits and overall economic benefits to the state would outweigh the cost of the incentives. But that's certainly not a guarantee. And I think that's something we'd have to keep an eye on, because that seems to me anyway, like a lot of money for multiple companies for these tax credits. Either way, with HB 388, the amended energy policy, and this alternative fuel hydrogen bill, the state is clearly backing hydrogen as a future fuel source. And that could be a good way. My concern is that it may be a way to support the dwindling fossil fuel industries as their market share diminishes. And this would be at the expense of air quality and lower greenhouse gas emissions. So if hydrogen is derived from fossil fuels, it is not a clean energy source. And I think we have to be careful to hold them to that fact. They're saying they're promoting hydrogen as a clean fuel, but it all depends on where it comes from. So it's not quite as simple as just using hydrogen. The last bill I want to talk about was sponsored by Joel Briscoe. It was HB 263, the Utah Clean Energy Fund. The league supported this measure. The bill would have created an independent nonprofit corporation for developing non-fossil fuel energy sources, energy efficient programs, and clean agricultural practices. It would have been seeded by a $1 million appropriation from the general fund. But it would also, this fund would also be able to apply for federal grants and accept gifts and donations. It would operate as a revolving fund, such that as loans are paid back, new loans would be issued. And 30% of the money would be targeted to impacted communities such as rural areas, distressed neighborhoods, and low-income communities. This bill didn't make it out of committee, unfortunately. In contrast to SB 243 that established a $75 million revolving fund to develop the inland port and Point of the Mountain area. So this was the same concept, but they couldn't see their way clear to allow 1 million for clean energy, but they can easily justify 75 million to develop the port and the Point of the Mountain. So it was suggested that this bill could be further studied during interim, and I hope that's something that will happen and that the league can support. One other thing I think was part of Emily's questions or suggestions was, were there any areas that we thought might be subjects for study by the league? And the one that came out to me after this session, and of course it's true in every session, but I was particularly concerned about the transparency in government this time. We had the bill for the inland port that got, I don't even know that it went to committee. I think it may have just been raised on the floor and was passed without, under suspension of the rules. So there was no public input whatsoever. And the Colorado River Commission is another bill that went through with very little input. And both of those entities are supposedly immune from public meeting rules. So it really shuts out the public in these very critical and important issues. And I think that's something that we should, maybe something that we should study in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. Vicki.
Okay, well, I'm Vicki Samuelson, and I covered the House Government Ops. And one of the bills that I thought, I'm not sure that they're earth-shattering, but I thought it was very interesting was HB 197. That was the voter affiliation amendment. That bill was brought about because in the elections in 2020 in the mayoral race here in Utah, a lot of people was signing up as being Republicans. And so Representative, I think you say his name, Tucher. I'm not sure that that's correct. Sorry if I fractured that. But he decided that people were jumping parties trying to rig the election and vote for the least favorite candidate rather than one that you thought you could be supportive of. And so he decided that to run this bill that would make it so you have to, if you're going to change parties to vote in a primary, you have to do it before March 31st, or at least by midnight on March 31st. And that's the March before the primary. And that's on an even year election. That said, he didn't have any information or any proof that that actually happened. And there was a survey that was done by a college that stated that it wasn't the Democrats that really signed up a lot for to vote Republican. It was actually the independents. And a lot of those independents stayed within that party. So it was kind of a bill that didn't really need to happen because it didn't happen the way he thought it happened. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It was a watch bill for the league. We didn't have a position on that. Another one that I think is one that could have a fairly big impact on Utah is HB 36 or 136, excuse me, and that's the initiative and referendum modification bill, also by Representative Teacher, if that's correct. This changes the way they gather signatures, and this forces them, rather than the signature gatherers, to instead of being paid by the signature, they're now supposed to be paid hourly. They also must wear a bid. It gives the dimensions of the size of the ID badge they're supposed to wear with a ID number that's specific to them. And they have to present that information to the person that they're standing on their doorstep of, and also watch them read the referendum or the initiative. in its entirety and initial that they have done so. And then it also informs the Lieutenant Governor's office, gives them instructions on how to put the signatures on the website, and also how you can remove your signature if you choose to do so. That bill was a watch for us, and we didn't have a position on it, but I think it's just one more step in keeping the people out of government, being able to work in being able to influence their government and have a say in their government. And I think that's just going to get worse. So one of the bills that we did support that I thought was really great was HB 075, and that was the municipality alternative voting method, which is, and it's the pilot project. If you remember back in January of 19, they created the pilot project, and it runs until 2016. And we had a couple of cities that did jump in to try to do this, and that was Vineyard and Payson down in Utah County. And they ran an election by using ranked choice voting, and we support that. And it worked really, really well for them. Also, in the last election in 2020, both parties actually used ranked choice voting when they was doing their candidates. So it worked well for them, and they wasn't there all night. This made a couple of changes to it. There was some confusion about who says they can do this and who says they can't. So they decided it would be the legislative body of that municipality. The other thing that they changed in that is the effective date for it, and extended it out for them to be able to opt in. And that was moved from April to the second week in May. And then also one of the hangups with some of the municipalities not jumping in the first time around with this was because a lot of the county clerks are against this. So also it says in there that if they do decide to use alternative voting methods, that the county clerks can't refuse to do it for them and run the election. One bill I think is really, really, really troubling is HB 294. This is the Pandemic Emergency Powers Amendment. This is by Representative Paul Ray. This one is his end game to the COVID virus and getting rid of the masks. And so they negotiated with the governor, they negotiated with the Utah Department of Health, other stakeholders in this thing, and decided that April 10th was the drop dead date that you don't have to wear a mask anymore. So this, I think, could have a real big impact depending on how we do with the vaccinations and where we go from here. So he seems to think that the virus is going to end on April the 10th. So scary. One thing that I thought was really good too, I don't know how big of an impact it's going to have, or it sounded good to me because it's an open and public meetings. So it's SB 72, and this bill prohibits a vote in a closed meeting. The only vote that they can take in a closed meeting is one to end that meeting. So maybe this will end some of the shenanigans that goes on in closed meetings where these secret votes happen. So that's about it. Oh, one that I'm really excited about that got funding this year is the Murdered Women and Girls Indigenous People Task Force. That was created in 2019, that task force, but it never got funded because of COVID-19. And so they allocated some money to it, and they actually extended the deadline on that. So that was really good to start seeing why we're having so many people on the reservations and that end up missing. So that's what I got.
Thanks, Vicki. Again, in the audience, if you would like to ask a question, you can just raise your hand, or I can read from the chat box if you want to use that. We have Kathy with Vicki. Was there any medical testimony about the April date choice for ending the use of masks? And I would also like to point out the choice of words. That's a drop dead rate. What date? So I like, hopefully that's not prophetic. That's just a choice of words. Yeah,
it is just words. And
yeah.
no, there was concerns about it, and I think some of the pushback was that they wouldn't be able to tell private businesses to wear a mask. So there's been a lot of stuff circulating around saying that if a private business tells you you have to wear a mask, you have to wear a mask. This is for government businesses that they don't have to do that. And they're still saying with crowds and that out in the public and that they're hoping that you'll be do your due diligence and wear a mask anyway, even though you can be, you're not mandated to do so. Please do this. And if we all remember, that didn't work out really well until after the mandate. So that's what precipitated the mandate in the first place, because people weren't doing this. And now we're going back to, it's not a mandate, and hopefully you'll be good kids and do it.
Great. Other questions from the audience? I'd ask one question of you all. With this change in how we did the legislature this year with being on Zoom, do you feel that what are the positives of doing it this way versus what are we giving up by not having it face to face? Do you want to comment about that? Hey, Kathy, you need to unmute.
I can certainly comment about some of the positives. It was great not to have to get up and get dressed and drive up to the Capitol and look for a parking place or take the bus downtown or whatever at 8 o'clock on a snowy morning. So that the convenience was marvelous.
Yeah. Norma, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. You need to unmute. That's negative. Demonstrate the negative. Thank you.
No, I agree with what Kathy said. It was convenient. I think what I noticed though is with the Zoom meetings, you're focusing in on one speaker. And I always find it fascinating to sit in the committee rooms and see the reactions of the other committee members and the interactions and things. I think I missed a lot. Especially with new members who, you're not familiar with. I think it can be really helpful to be in the room.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not bemoaning the fact that, I could sit around in my pajamas and have a cup of tea and watch my committee meeting instead of, like you said, having to get dressed and drive to the Capitol. I mean, really, that's asking a lot.
I feel like a combination is ideal. You go in person to some meetings, like you say, the body language is important, and you observe them observing you, and sometimes it's just nice that they know there are people there watching them.
Yeah.
But it's also the convenience, as everyone says. I'm kind of 50-50.
Yeah.
I wanted to add that too, that when we're in person, they're seeing us as well as we seeing them. And so I've always thought that was an important part of our monitoring the committees.
All right. Well, any other thoughts? Well, I'll say one more thought about the legislative session. Again, as every year, the number of bills that suddenly appear in the last week, and whether they get a fair committee hearing or they're just placed on there, needs to be of great concern to every person. It's hard to keep up with. It's hard to feel like you have a voice if you can't, they're gun fired out of the cannon at the end. I find that always frustrating, and again, frustrating this year, just the number of bills that come out at the end. So one more thing too, Vicki, before you go, is about the ERA, because the ERA for instance, didn't make it to the floor. And I know we worked hard. We work hard every year, but you want to comment about that?
Yeah, it was really sad. We thought we might have a chance getting it out of rules, but unfortunately we didn't. And like you said, we worked hard. So we're kind of now going to regroup. We're not giving up. We're still going to try and move this thing forward. It's to our advantage if we do. So we would really like some people to come to us. You can come to me, you can email me any strategic thoughts you might have on how we might move this forward. I was told by one person that in another meeting that it just isn't a priority because it's mostly men up there. It's not a priority. And I don't know how to me, that's saying you're not important enough to even be listening to and know whether or not I want to make you a priority. You know what I mean? It's shutting us down before we even get started. But then, that's the way it seems to be working. But we need some new ideas, and we need some more participation, because they just think it's a handful of people, that's women that are out there doing this. Would like to get more men involved. So if your husbands or your sons or whatever would like to be involved with the movement, we would jump at that. We need more involvement and more ideas of how to move this forward.
Okay, great. Well, we begin the interim sessions in, let's see, what month is this? So, let's see, in a month, a little over 6 weeks, maybe something. So if you want to be involved as the audience members, if you're interested in learning more about this and maybe working with one of our observers and how to get involved, please contact the office at lwvutah.org. And we will also place this video up on our website. If you know people who wanted to attend but couldn't get to it, it'll be on our website later this week. So again, thank you everyone for all that you've done to make our mission of empowering voters truly in action. So thank you. And good night.
Peggy.
Okay,
Thank you, Peggy.
bye.
Bye.